All right. We are at part 3 of 3 here. Before we get into today's video, YouTube is run by algorithms, so I've restarted my channel. I would appreciate any likes, follows, subs, and absolutely promise this won't be in every single video, but this is the world we live in. What initially brought me to this video series was the thought experiment. So let's make the perfect fighting game, shall we? Before we get into that, I made a survey for this purpose, so thank you for participating. We have the various participants here. Some were more salty than others. Before we get into the really fun part of this, there are some elephants in the room that we need to address. In truth, if fighting games deserve the audience they ask for, they'd have it. There's a number of areas fighting games lack in, and it explains why the casual audience would be so deterred or even ignore the genre. Fighting games are too hard. They don't have enough content. There is no universal control scheme. They're still being seen as arcade games, which will define what arcade games are in a moment. Control schemes. Take, for instance, FPSs. FPSs and third-person shooters more or less have the same control scheme. There isn't really a question of how do you shoot. The controls aren't really where the difficulty comes in. The UI is clean, and you immediately know where your ammo and health are. Similarly, MOBAs ask very little of their players in terms of execution. Yes, there are some advanced characters who are modular, invoker, or involve more micromanagement, Meepo. But generally, as long as you can click 4 buttons, you can successfully play a mobile character. There's plenty of other genres this could apply to, from puzzles to digital CCGs, but I digress. While some bristle at the idea, it's really just old men yelling at clouds. And the number of sheer people being gate-kept is apparent. An interesting phrase that pops up on the Triple KO podcast is that fighting games are still arcade games. I haven't really seen to this referred to at all, so I'll see if I can explain. Once upon a time, Nintendo was the pinnacle of game development and publishing, and their evil was law. If you're still a Nintendo fan, that's still your experience. Japan was king of the games industry, not so much anymore. In a way, those of you who still remember Japan game development around 2011, it was much the same. The thing is, game development is ever changing. A mobile game could come out tomorrow in a new genre and immediately spawn 15 mobile competitors, inspire indie developers to come out with a game in the same vein 5 years later, and have copycats from bigger competitors in 1 year. Even outside of games, Japan is a proud people and they don't like change. Somewhat xenophobic. They're still doing paper filing and such in pandemic times, as that's the way they've always done it. I say this to say that fighting games have been majorly Japanese, and though these games haven't budged, Japan thinks of Japan, and that even means in making an arcade game. This is also a weird stance in that if any format they should be prioritizing in the modern day, it should be mobile, if not Game Pass. Even by the time you're watching this video, I'm sure we'll have some Japanese-produced fighting games that don't have rollback. Meanwhile, Skullgirls, MK11, Multiverses all have no bones about absorbing stuff like rollback and are open to ideas. Competition brings innovation, and as much as we want more fighting games, they need to work for our dollars. And this sense, fighting games have been lagging behind and need to win people back with these sort of things. Guilty Gear Strive, which has rollback netcode, is the best-selling Guilty Gear ever. Sam Show 2019, while it doesn't have rollback, is the best-selling SNK game ever. Fighting game difficulty. Say what you will, but fighting games are hard. There's probably something to be said for doing an experiment and seeing how to convert Dark Souls players into fighting game players, but in the meantime, let's take a look at it. We've seen simple combos and auto combos for quite a few fighting games, and in SF6, this may this may just be the biggest name to do it and advertise it. Capcom clearly saw the sheer amount of money Smash prints every release and with their classic and modern controls, they plan on cashing in. In some cases, it's as simple as if you can't beat them, join them. And speaking personally, I don't care if it's called baby mode, being able to try out some characters I can't wrap my head around or are too technical for me in an easy mode would be great. Communication is another point fighting games can work on. Of course, there is a language barrier, but again, it isn't just for Japanese arcades anymore. While roadmaps have become somewhat of a meme in the game industry, and we've seen somewhat of one from Strive, I think especially in a COVID world, people understand. I happily pay for season passes for unknown characters, stages and extras, but others might have to or want to, and there's nothing wrong with that, be more judicious about their purchases. Games should also have an English dub, if not going the full Monty of the Tekken route. I think this would represent real willingness to move beyond just being an arcade game. I remember when I purchased Dragon Ball Fighters, I had to dig into the game and turn the English dub on, which is a really weird flex. On the same note, trailers and characters breakdowns need to sell the character not just for hype reasons, but for playability reasons. ArcSys is good to bring up for both sides of this, really. As there isn't anything we can really pull from their short, almost teaser trailers for a character, but they do end up giving us a character breakdown not far after. The former we can probably drop entirely. Hell, with influencer culture, there's always going to be someone playing these games, so make it so that there's an official character ambassador. Dota 2 has in-game builds, lists that populate on picking a character. These builds illustrate when you should do what order you should buy abilities, and what items to buy. And in fighting game context, seeing something like, seeing something like Strive's Combo Maker with ratings in a general consensus, something like this is the most liked B&B combo, this is the most liked corner combo, this is the most liked meaty button, this is the most liked reset, etc., and so forth. Also, to pimp Strive again, them describing and showing the moves and what they do in the move list and Combo Maker is great. I think Street Fighter 6 is doing this, but of course that's not even alpha right now. To be completely fair, I think there was some sort of possible patent for training modes, so I can't chalk it up just to devs being lazy. Probably the biggest issue with fighting games is that they don't have enough content. As we'll come to discuss, it almost doesn't matter what is added, just that value and content be added, period. If them's fighting herds can have content as an indie game, then there's really no excuse for non-NRS games not giving us more content. So some of the skepticism in that regard is warranted. In general, fighting games need to spend more money in development. Rollback is necessary. The things I've went over are very much necessary. So that was all the things that a fighting game needed before we get into the actual making of fighting games part of things. We'll start out with a couple of gimmies. So it'll have an appropriate price. The net code will be rollback, and we'll discuss the rest of these. Though what I asked about varied in my poll that I sent out, I generalized the answers into categories and surprisingly got both unique ideas and good feedback. So, favorite fighting game of all time was a bit of a gimme question, and by asking this first and the follow-up of the past 5 years, I can root out people who are picking what they are due to nostalgia or because it was their first fighting game. While there's nothing wrong with that, that's not necessarily something a fighting game can impress upon someone, so we can't use it to make a fighting game. Unsurprisingly, gameplay was the highest mark response here, with many citing freedom. Second place brings us characters, one of the most important part of fighting games, and in many cases, unique. Third place, there's graphics, presentation, animation, watchability. We're a visual species, so having a graphical style to stand out clearly leaves an impression. And so with this data, we can add a couple things. When I make Fighting versus Max, Third Breath, Indescribable Sensation, the gameplay will have freedom. The characters that attract people and will follow up on the initial concept. Because of the aforementioned nostalgia slash first game phenomenon, I implemented the second question. Favorite fighting game of the past 5 years. The top three are repeated, which isn't going to surprise anyone. But in fourth, we have a tie of fun and online excellence. And finally, the fact that it's the first fighting game. It makes sense that fun is such a huge factor for people, as that's one of the things after first blush which will keep a person's attention. Online is also similarly self explanatory, but especially in a pandemic, a tolerable to excellent online experience is the only way some can play a fighting game. I know personally with KOF 15's matchmaking being broken, I had to just give up and go back to Strive because I couldn't learn any further without a steady stream of matches. First fighting games is interesting in that this segment and other parts of the survey, knowing that new people are joining the FGC, should be noted. And what we have to add at this point is fun. You can't exactly boil that down, but we know freedom is a big element in it all. So really just have to cross my fingers and hope that I'm continuing to watch the game and look at player feedback. Just to add feedback to our game. Fighting versus Max, third breath indescribable sensation. We're looking at fun for number 2. Next up, we have the favorite features in fighting games, eliminating the obvious yet sometimes neglected rollback netcode and basic quality of life things. We come up with this list. It is interesting that people are into story modes, as they're usually not this good. We've seen some pretty lackluster story modes lately, so I would caution against this. In fact, I think number 2 here is actually a much better goal for fighting games. Roguelite experiences as seen in Streets of Rage 4 and plenty of other places will give some replayability and wild interactions that will be a spectacle for those playing on their own or even streaming. Though people didn't necessarily ask for a roguelike single player, I lumped a lot of the responses together, and the thing is, this actually isn't new. Dragon Ball FighterZ story mode is actually a really bad version of this. Killer Instinct has one, BlazBlue had one in the Abyss mode. As far as the one I've seen, it's done on a very surface level. I'm probably most familiar with Legends of Runeterra's Path of Champions mode. In it, you level both on an account level and a character level. You get exciting new character upgrades where you'll most likely break the game and completely overpower the really powerful final boss. I will say, as somebody that is into competing on equal terms, playing a fighting game normally, it is a nice change of pace, this sort of thing, more than anything. Translating this to fighting games, instead of getting better cards in Legends of Runeterra, let's just take Ryu. He can get gear to wear to improve his basic stats. Leveling up will allow for longer combo length, and bigger rewards can be something like upgrading Hadoukens, like I have illustrated here, starting with full meter, etc. I mean, there's lots of options in that situation. And the third category, a character customizer, is interesting, where some brought up in the fact that they do actually want Echo Fighters. These aren't going to take up a ton of development time and can provide some excitement in terms of unlocks, even if it isn't allowed competitively. Weapon packs are also interesting, as we see some of this in, say, Tekken, where there should be some silliness. Fully formed single player came in fourth, but that's probably because so many people were conflating story mode and single player. But again, I think it's key that we think about what fighting game single player content can really be, and it doesn't just have to be a story mode. MOBAs like League of Legends have gotten story post-release, but they're operating off of gameplay and character, sound familiar, in almost entirety. Skins or costumes end up at 5. I think unless you've been under a rock for the last decade of game development, you know why. I'm really surprised more games don't go wild with this as a former MOBA player. It's how they make their money in the first place. Consider Dota 2's yearly Arcana. A really cool costume that changes voice lines, animations, etc. Of course, changing animations is dangerous, as we saw with KOF 15's Terry's Garo costume, but new things like this will always take time to perfect. SNK had polygonal costumes for a couple of characters in Jam Show 2019. A brilliant throwback that I'm surprised more fighting games don't do. Yes, we do get nostalgia costumes in Street Fighter V, but that's Street Fighter V. And MK11 did do a pretty classy version of nostalgia overall with MK11. Even Tomb Raider has done it with having OG polygonal Laura in there. Also, mastery skins would check a number of boxes that we'll come into, and some we've already discussed, and that that's something to achieve, and it adds more skins to the game. While I don't necessarily want monetization to the point of Dead or Alive 6, in terms of marketing and getting player hype up, this could be huge. Have a goal that with a certain amount of viewers on Twitch during a main tourney, they'll have Tetsuya Nomura design a costume for a Shune. Tell players that if they reach 1 million online matches in the month, they'll get Guilty Gear's Daisuke to design a Tekken Lars costume. In the aforementioned Dota Compendium, when you buy it, you're adding to the pot for the biggest Dota tourney that year, the International, and you can vote on who gets this super awesome Arcana costume. There's definitely unreached potential there in terms of fighting games. There was something kind of similar in Street Fighter V and maybe Street Fighter 4 where a winner of certain tournament would pick a costume, but we can do better. I know we can. So I won't go over the rest of these, but if people want, we can do a follow-up video on the poll in its entirety. But there are some interesting tidbits. Co-op and dramatic battle are both something that we're asked for, and they have in common that they're increasing the player count. Bottom line, adding to the game more fun. Of course, it's unbalanced, but part of that is the point. People ask for awards, which I'll just call achievements/trophies since there's so much overlap. There's definitely a reason and room to have more achievables for players. I think Third Strike Online had this, and this is another area fighting games just doesn't measure up in. I've previously covered it in the video series of having an actual arcade mode and attorney mode, but even in doing what fighting games used to do in terms of having a ton of unlockables, that would be huge. But as we can't dwell on the past, things like the Omega Rugal boss rage in KOF 15, the Spirits in Smash, and nearly any free-to-play games achievements/challenges would qualify. Open world was also asked for, which was interesting. Obviously, fighting games need more content, but outside of fighting games, there's been a serious decline for both want and quality of open worlds, since they have to compare to Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild after all. So it may be questioned, do y'all really want an open world even if it's bad? Is the lore and the world of King of Fighters so interesting that you take a pretty crappy open world to go with it? So we add a couple more things here to our game. Our number 3, single player roguelite, a character customizer with character variants. And so it turns out that price has put off people of fighting games before. In no small number, it shows that both DLC and fighting games as a whole weren't purchased due to how pricey they are. Of course, with the game we're making, we've made sure it's feature-rich, so despite having a $70 price tag, people won't feel peeved in purchasing it. And on that note, people do in fact wait to purchase games. The majority of people wait until the first discount if they aren't purchasing it initially, which in today's day and age can happen during pre-release, but shocking to me was to see the high percentage of players that are willing to wait. It's a pretty well-known trope that the fighting games community can die very quickly. So, at least from my perspective, I'll try to get in there early. This also means I don't get completely left behind as people learn the game. Even to the point there are waiting for the game to get its last patch. We have people waiting for the game to get its last patch, a la a complete edition. I suppose an Injustice or Mortal Kombat game would still have enough single-player content to justify that sort of thing. And of course, as a statistician, I know I'd need a much more bigger sample to speak authoritatively. But even with this, it's apparent people are waiting to see how fighting games turn out. It's a pretty well-known trope for fighting games at 1.0 to be pretty rough, so even the most seasoned player may want to wait it out. And of course, $60 to $7 US, we're talking, because it's even more in other currencies usually, is a lot of money. I think there is something that's not really... I think that, rather, is something that's not really noted in terms of reviews and talked about with games. Triple KO made the very good point that the investment of both time and money in fighting games asks of you is huge, and each of the guys on the pod was hesitated to recommend fighting games at full price with how narrow their audience reaches, that audience being online, or that they may have little to no substantial single player. And price, boom. In discussing price, we also end up finding that the majority of people have been disappointed by fighting games in the survey. As I've talked about previously, fighting games need to impress and step up. It isn't solely an issue of people don't buy fighting games. That's not what's happening. Probably one of the most interesting finds of the survey is the preferred forms of monetization. This was a multi-choice one, as were many of the questions, so the percentages aren't mathematically correct, but looking at the graph and ranking still lets us know how accepted these things would be. In first place, though it's pretty close, we've got cosmetic monetization only. Tried and true, having cosmetics as the only monetization means there's a clear differentiation between what's paid and what's free, the Dota 2 model. It is also the clearest way of saying, sure, I'll support the developer beyond buying more copies of a game or giving them a donation for nothing. And on the dev side, looking special is apparent even in nature, so it's a no-brainer. People would want to do so in a game as well. As we know there's going to be monetization, it might as well be something we can stomach, yeah? Free to earn takes second place, and it's another model we've touched on plenty. Of course, the ability to earn is going to vary on how greedy the developer is, ranging from Legends of Runeterra having free Twitch drops every month and essentially being free, to Diablo Immortal taking literal years to compare to a fully paid player. So it is a bit of a toss-up, but I imagine these days, if you'd like not to have negative press, being less predatory is better. Even still, with another presidential cycle coming up, monetization very well could come under attack as loot boxes previously did. Of course, despite protests and naysayers, there's a reason why monetization is done the way it is. For the same reason movies bend over backwards to court the Chinese audience. Money makes it worth it. In third is the Battle Pass, Season Pass. Again, it's another model that makes it transparent of what you're getting. I think this is also exciting in that even free players are getting something. From the marketing standpoint, enticing to that someone can get a bunch of rewards right away when purchasing the Battle Pass at the end of it probably works a lot of the time. Also, with Halo Infinite seemingly setting the precedent, as far as I can tell, with battle passes being able to be finished whenever you feel like it, as opposed to them being limited time, this definitely avoids the pitfalls of loot boxes with some of the more cursed monetization. Fourth, we have Game of the Year editions, which is interesting. We've sort of talked about this earlier, but it just goes to show people are trying to get the most value out of their dollar. I wouldn't expect that people would really thirst after Game of the Year editions, but with all the updates to fighting games, monetization, and what we've talked about previously with people being willing to wait, I guess that does actually make sense. Fifth is a very interesting one, unlocking everything. This is mostly used as an option for people who simply don't have the time to grind it out in the crypt, as it were. As a working adult, I guess I would consider it, but I've never outright thought this in a fighting game, in the context of a fighting game. Of course, it hasn't majorly been necessary. I won't be going over the rest, but Again, we can do another video if people want to see the survey in full and go over that sort of thing. But in last places, we have loot boxes. We talked about previously how these even came under fire by politicians. So you can imagine the ire they've gained in the general populace as well. Additionally, with what we've seen in the preferred monetization, seeing what you will get and it only affecting specific parts of the game is huge in people's mind share. So we'll go with the majority vote and do cosmetic only. We are asking them to pay for the game up front after all. Roster isn't make or break, but it does seem there are a fair number of people looking for a specific character or roster composition. This sort of thing is covered in having characters that are interesting, that we've already included in the game. DLC can in fact change minds. A lot of what we went over is reaffirming what we already know about planning, know and are planning doing in this hypothetical game, but it's good to know. People are looking at what these games are doing and how they're changing, and ultimately if they're worth it. People expect single player content. It might seem like a strange question to those of you not in the know, but it's very valid. Now that the fighting games are outside of the esports or die trying mode, and in faith fighting games, and faith in fighting games has been restored, hopefully companies will follow suit. We've already covered this in our game through a roguelite experience. So I'm sure everyone knows that the achievement craze is over and isn't what it was. But the reason I asked this question is because I was pretty sure that this was the case and that there's opportunity here. I've talked about this a little, but making sure achievements are relevant should be a huge thing. I don't give a shit about achievements, but I would if they mattered and were relevant. And even still, there are players who do, and you can trick them into learning the game and possibly going online by making the achievements relevant and appropriate. These don't need to be achievements in both name and function. Award skins and costumes, in-game currency, make them hard challenges like Omega Ruel Boss Rage. Again, time, money, and effort, fighting game devs. That's all we want to see. With the top 5 things in fighting games, it's sort of a given in what people would pick, but it's interesting to see outside of first and second place how people's wants are diversified, and ultimately what that means is that fighting game devs can't just mindlessly pump out esports online versus fighters. Different modes and features are wanted by different people. And again, this next topic here was sort of a gimme, but part of me was curious about how people value these things. Again, gameplay wins out, which should be no surprise to anyone from what we discussed here. Fun does come in third, which is a bit of a surprise, in that it's more important than having a balanced game for most of the people surveyed. But of course, if a game is balanced but you aren't having fun, what's the point? Let's see. While I'm not going to go over all of the rest of these, it is interesting to see that an interesting graphic style holds greater weight to the survey takers than a cutting-edge graphic style. This definitely reeks of fighting games as they're made now, but I wanted to see if people really valued and it would sort of influence them to buy a cutting-edge graphics, you know, PS5 running at max settings fighting game that, rather than just invoking a certain style. To talk about balance a bit, though, it is interesting to see that people want to see a balanced game. I've always wanted balance in the games that I've played, but I've heard, and we've sometimes heard games have this posthumously, that they don't actually aim for balance, and that it creates a certain drama or narrative. Also, it looks like memes are not up there. We're not going to be morbing anytime soon. This would not be a fighting game without a real problem tacked on needlessly, so let's see what's going to be wrong with our game. Let's just roll a die very quickly. Okay, and so out of all of our choices here, we are blessed by number 3. The publisher is Konami and is a jackass and messes with development. So, very fun stuff there. I'm sure we're all happy that the fighting game we created, that's perfect. Konami is just going to disregard and not care about it. Um, and so, our next slide here, credit where credit's due. And that's all, folks. Remember, please hit these buttons. I'm living by an algorithm. It's not as the dinosaurs on The Simpsons said, or not The Simpsons, the Flintstones. It's a living.